1969. So we stayed in Montreal for 12 years. And in that time, I went to Sir George. I went to Sir George a year after the occupation at Sir George Williams. Because Sir George is really what they call the Anderson affair. There was a professor who taught physiology, and he just didn't want the little black boys to get ahead. He knew all the little black boys who were in science, doing physiology, their goal was to go to medical school. And I don't know, he said he was a self-appointed gatekeeper, and he gave nobody in that group more than a C. And these were guys who were pulling down A's and B's and everything else. But when they go into physiology, they're getting a C. And they know to go to med school and your best you could present with a C isn't good. And that was what I was in the class the next year with Professor Abbott, who took over that class. And I was in the next class. So it was a class under the microscope. I came out with a B out of Abbott's class, so I was okay. It was the first time that an epidemiological study was used as part of a legal defense. The Crees in northwest Quebec were attempting to sue Domtar for polluting their waterways and damaging their lifestyles. Because in Quevilon, which was 400 kilometers from Val-d'Or, there was a paper mill town. The only thing there was a paper mill. And they use a chlor-alkali plant, and one of the electrodes has some mercury. And the Crees were ready to sue Domtar, claiming that they were damaging their waterways. And Domtar hired McGill Department of Epidemiology to conduct an epidemiological study. And the design of the study was very simple, case control. They looked at all the Crees who lived close to the mill. And we had a questionnaire in Cree, and we had blood samples and hair samples taken, and they had a full neurological examination. And then when we finished doing the Crees close to Val-d'Or, to Quevilon, we then went miles away to where Crees live in Senneterre. And we did the same studies on the Crees, the same number of controls. For every person we did 200 something in Quevilon, we did 200 something in Senneterre. And to show that, to see, well, are any things that we are seeing any worse closer to the pulp mill or further from the pulp mill? But one of the things that we did for that particular investigation was we spent a weekend in Beaumont developing a protocol when we were going into the bush for this study. And we had neurologists from McGill, neurologists from McMaster University. It was McMaster-McGill joint study. When I came out of the bush, a lawyer came and handed me a letter. I was not allowed to talk about the study, report anything of the study, share any of the information to anybody. The letter was a sort of a muzzle, basically. But the plus side of it, I was the person who was going to, if we go to court, I was the person who was going to have to get up in court and provide what they call continuity of evidence. I knew where the samples were taken, I knew where they were after they were taken, and I delivered them to the specialist measuring hair samples in London. I worked for occupational health and safety for 18 years. I enjoyed working at occupational health and safety every minute of the day. Now, here I was working for a government agency. And when I came out here, the first investigation I did was at a meatpacking plant in Lethbridge. And the problem there was that there was a labor unrest with management and the union that was at the plant. And in the midst of this, the workers were complaining, something is wrong in this plant. Too many people coming down with this funny fever and, you know what I mean, something. And then they'll get better, they'll get medication, they'll get better, come back, and then another guy going off. But what was happening was that there was a zoonotic disease that was present in the meatpacking plant, to explain to you. A zoonosis is a disease which an animal has, which can be transmitted to a man, a worker, who is slaughtering an animal. And brucella or brucellosis is one of those bacteria that is in animals. Now, the federal government, and what was so interesting about this investigation, I was straddling federal jurisdictions and provincial jurisdictions. Animal health is federal. The meatpacking plant is provincial. And there was a union in between. But anyway, I conducted the investigation. And because it was a federal problem, I could ask Ottawa to send me an epidemiologist in training to take all the blood samples, a doctor who is training to be an epidemiologist, who would take all the blood samples for me and who would administer my questionnaire. So I got that. And the way I got that was that the director of communicable diseases at the federal government in Alberta was Dr. Frank White. And he told me that. He says, what you're doing is covers, and he says, okay. So he made all he can. So I got a physician to come out. I had my design, finished the investigation, went beautifully. I found out what the problem was. It was a case. And what had happened was the federal government has a policy that if one cow is found present with brucellosis, they depopulate the whole herd to avoid it from spreading. That's how they control it. When an animal has brucellosis, the meat is still good for human consumption. It doesn't affect that. Because one of the procedures in all carcasses before they come out for human consumption, they're refrigerated for 18 to 24 hours. Every carcass is refrigerated. And that kills every brucellosis in that animal stone dead. Okay? But anyway, I did the investigation. I found out the problem, where it was occurring and all that kind of stuff. And I finished my report and I left it there. I looked at the Workers' Compensation Board. I was working very closely with the staff there. And they wanted to know, what is the cost of when they have a claim for hearing loss? Hearing loss is a permanent disability. And once you can show it is occupationally related, they have to accept it. And if it's an occupational disease and it happened while you're working, you immediately get a pension. Okay? Because you have permanently lost your hearing. Not that you can't hear, you have suffered hearing loss. You can hear. But the big joke is you could hear, but you can't hear when she say yes. You understand? So that's the kind of hearing loss you suffer. They're trying to determine the cost of hearing loss. And I looked at it, what have you done before? And what they had done before, they would simply say, well, we had 10 claims last year. We spent $1 million, or we spent $10,000. So it's about $1,000 a claim. They were simply dividing what they paid out in the year by the number of claims in the year, and I said that's erroneous. That information doesn't make sense. The reason being, a claim for her hearing loss is a protracted process. They have to get your occupational history to show that you're in a noisy working position. They have to have you have your hearing audiograms done to show that you have suffered the loss. And when that claim comes to occupational and safety, it could take anywhere from 1 to 5 years to be resolved. Okay? Especially if you're working in an environment where they don't have good occupational hygiene records of what the noise level was. They can only come to your company now, as it is now. You have no idea what it was 10 years before, if it was noisier or if it is less noisy. But if you come there now where it is now and you measure, you say, yes, it's a noisy place now. But was it noisier before or less noisy now? You don't know. So they have to tease all that out to decide on how they're going to. Okay, so what I'm saying, so I told them, let me have a look at that. And what I did was I said, I'm going to take a cohort of claims. I said, I want to go back to all the claims that came 7 years ago. And then I'm going to follow them through until they're all resolved. And then we're going to figure out what it cost you. That is a better measure of what it's costing you for a claim of hearing loss. Now, the particular year I looked at this hearing loss claim, there were only 80 claims in that year. But I looked at, for that particular cohort that I followed, we got a what I call a more reliable measure of what is costing you for a claim of hearing loss. When I looked at that problem and look at how much hearing loss claims were coming, when you consider all the claims that came to WCB, hearing loss claims were less than 1%, point something 1%, less than 1%, less than 0.1% of the claims that came. So you could dismiss it and say, yeah, it's only a little bit. But I showed them that, yes, this year you have 80. And if you accept only 50%, you have 40. But you have given those 40 men a pension. Next year you get another 80 and only half. So now you have 80 men who have a pension. I said, do you realize you're developing an exponential curve here? You're stacking all of these who are... So when we project that out, it's millions of dollars it will cost them at the compensation board. So they had to sit down and come up with a new policy. So they said, we cannot deny it's an occupational injury. Yes, it is an occupational injury. Yes, it's a claim. We're going to settle the claim. But we have to look at how we're doing it. But if I'm a millwright and I am 50 years of age, and after working all those years, I am at the top of my game. You could give me a big block of metal and I could build you a nice valve. I have my skills. I could machine a tool, machine something out of a piece of metal for you brilliantly, although I have hearing loss. So what they look at, and they said, you know, we will accept hearing loss claims, but we will not give them a pension. We will give them a lump sum because they have suffered a social disability. They can't hear when she say yes, but they could make a valve out of a piece of metal. So his ability to earn has not been affected. His ability to hear has. And that affects him socially.